Wade Dillard had done the math. He'd paid off the right people, filed the right papers, chained up the one person who could stop him, and he'd slept like a baby that night. But here's what Wade didn't account for. He didn't know that a 20-year-old girl, bleeding from the wrists, would drag herself free. He didn't know she'd walk 11 miles carrying the chain that held her. And he sure didn't know she'd walk into a bar full of men the law wouldn't touch. And that every single one of them would stand up. Wade Dillard made one mistake. He assumed that girl had nobody. Before we get into this one, I want to know something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments. I ask because this story, what you're about to hear, it didn't just happen in one small town in Tennessee. It happened because people decided that silence wasn't an option. And right now, wherever you're sitting, whatever time it is, you're one of those people. So tell me where you are. Let's see how far this story reaches. Because a man like Wade Dillard survives in the dark. And every single comment down there is another light he can't turn off. Now, let me take you to a place most people drive right past without a second look. A flat roof bar off a cracked two-lane highway in rural Tennessee. The kind of place that doesn't advertise. The kind of place that doesn't need to. The kind of place where, on one ordinary Thursday afternoon, a door opened and everything changed. This is that story. There's a place off Route 41 in rural Tennessee where the asphalt cracks and the county stops pretending it cares. You'd miss it if you weren't looking. Most people aren't. A gravel lot. A flat-roofed building with a tin overhang and a neon sign that hasn't spelled its full name in about 11 years. The D and the E burned out sometime around 2013, and nobody ever fixed them. Didn't need to. If you knew what the Dusty Mule was, you already knew where to find it. And if you didn't know, well, it wasn't looking for you either. The front door was solid oak, scarred at the bottom from decades of steel-toed boots kicking it open. Inside, the air smelled like cigarette smoke that had soaked so deep into the walls it had become part of the architecture. The leather on the bar stools was cracked down to the foam. The jukebox in the corner still worked, mostly. It played everything you put in, except track 7, which it had been skipping on since the Clinton administration. Nobody fixed that either. You just learned to avoid track 7. That was the kind of place this was. You didn't fix things. You adjusted to them. And eventually, they became yours. Carved into the bar top, under a layer of polyurethane that had gone amber with age, there were initials. Hundreds of them. Some with dates going back to the 70s. A few with hearts. A few with words you wouldn't say in church. Dutch, the man behind the bar, had been there long enough to remember who carved most of them. He never said. He just stood there, same as he always did, wiping the same glass with the same rag, watching everything and offering nothing unless you asked. Dutch had a face like a road map of everywhere he'd never talk about. 62 years old, arms like dock rope. He didn't own the Dusty Mule, not on paper, but he was its keeper, and everyone knew the difference. Outside, lined up along the gravel like a row of sleeping wolves, sat the bikes. 17 of them that afternoon. Harleys, mostly. A couple of Indians. Chrome catching the low sun, leather saddlebags worn soft at the edges. Each one a signature. Each one belonging to a man or woman. Wearing the same patch on their back. A torch burning inside an iron circle. No words beneath it. The iron vigil didn't explain itself. And at the far end of the bar, sitting alone with a cup of black coffee at 2 in the afternoon, while every man around him drank beer, sat Hollis Brennan. He wasn't the biggest man in the room. Wasn't the loudest. Didn't need to be. There was a pair of reading glasses tucked into the breast pocket of his leather vest, and something about that detail told you more than any patch ever could. He was the kind of man who read things, contracts, people, rooms, before he ever opened his mouth. Pepper was at the pool table, running a game against 2 prospects who didn't yet understand they'd already lost. She played with an easy grin, chalking her cue like she had all the time in the world, because she did. And in the corner booth, bouncing his knee and peeling the label off a bottle he'd barely touched, sat Colt, 24, prospect patch on his vest, trying to look like he belonged, which is always the surest sign that a man isn't sure he does. It was the kind of afternoon where nothing happened. The kind of afternoon that tricks you into thinking the world is standing still. But the world was already moving. 11 miles down the road, it was already in motion. Now, to understand what walked through that door later, to really understand it, you have to go back. Not to the bar. Not to the road. You have to go back to a piece of land about 11 miles east of the Dusty Mule, up where the hills start to fold into each other and the soil turns red after it rains. 40 acres of Tennessee hillside. The Harmon farm. It was never a wealthy property, never a showpiece. The fences leaned a little. The barn roof had been patched more times than anyone could count. But there was something about that place, something that had less to do with what it looked like and more to do with what it held. Every square foot of it had been touched by someone who loved it. And that someone was Nora Harmon. Nora's husband, a man named Vernon, built the farmhouse with his own hands in 1974. Cut the timber himself. Laid every floorboard. Hung the porch swing from a beam he'd sanded smooth with his bare palms because he said Nora deserved something soft to sit on after a long day. Vernon died in 1998, quiet as he lived, and Nora never remarried. Didn't see the point. She had the house. She had the land. She had the porch swing and the kitchen where she made everything from scratch. Biscuits, pie crust, soap, decisions. Nora Harmon was not a woman who waited for the world to hand her things. She built what she needed, fixed what broke, and buried what she lost. And she kept going. Then one autumn afternoon, a car pulled up the gravel drive, and a woman Nora hadn't seen in 2 years stepped out, opened the back door, and lifted out a 4-year-old girl. The child was clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. There was a note pinned to her jacket. The note said, "I can't do this anymore. She's better off with you. Don't come looking for me." The woman got back in the car. She didn't look at the child again. She drove down the hill, and she never came back. Her name was carved into the oak tree behind the house. She'd put it there as a teenager, back when she still lived under Nora's roof, back before whatever hollowed her out had finished the job. The girl's name was Brielle. Nora raised her on a pension and a prayer. There was no manual, no help, just a 70-year-old woman and a child who didn't speak for the first 3 months. Brielle would sit on the porch steps and stare down the driveway like she was waiting for that car to come back. It never did, and somewhere around the 4th month, Brielle stopped looking. She turned around, walked into the kitchen, and climbed into Nora's lap while she was shelling peas. Didn't say a word, just sat there, breathing, letting herself be held. From that day on, it was the two of them. Not sentimental about it. Practical. Nora taught Brielle to read on that porch. Taught her to cook in that kitchen. Taught her that a woman who can feed herself and fix her own fence doesn't need to ask permission from anyone. Brielle was quiet, fierce, and loyal in a way that almost frightened Nora sometimes. Like the girl had decided at 4 years old that she would never lose anyone again, even if it meant holding on so tight her knuckles turned white. Then, one Tuesday morning in March, Brielle came downstairs and found Nora on the kitchen floor. One hand still reaching for the coffee pot. Eyes open, but seeing nothing Brielle could follow. Everything changed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The ambulance took 19 minutes. Brielle counted every one of them. And that's when Wade Dillard showed up. Like he'd been waiting for it. Wade Dillard was Nora's nephew by marriage, connected to her late husband's side through a second cousin nobody kept in close contact with. He lived about an hour south, in a newer house with a newer truck and the kind of smile that always seemed to arrive about half a second before the rest of his face was ready for it. He wasn't a stranger. He'd show up at holidays sometimes, send a card at Christmas, call once or twice a year, usually around tax season, usually asking questions about the property that Nora would answer politely and then change the subject. If you'd asked anyone in town about Wade Dillard, they'd have told you he was fine, pleasant enough, wore decent clothes, spoke well. And that's the thing about men like Wade. They don't walk into a room looking like a threat. They walk in looking like a solution. They bring flowers. They shake hands. They say all the right things in all the right order. And you don't realize what they are until they've already taken something from you. Wade showed up at the hospital the same day Nora was admitted. Brought a bouquet of yellow carnations in a glass vase with a ribbon on it. Set them on the windowsill beside Nora's bed while she lay there connected to machines that blinked and beeped and did the breathing her body had temporarily forgotten how to do. He patted Brielle on the shoulder, told her everything was going to be all right, told her to go home and get some rest. Then he stepped into the hallway and spent 45 minutes on his phone. Brielle didn't go home. She slept in the chair beside Nora's bed for 3 nights straight, eating nothing but vending machine crackers and black coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. She was 20 years old. She was terrified. And she was completely alone. What Brielle didn't know, what she wouldn't find out until it was nearly too late, was that during those 3 days while she sat in that chair holding her grandmother's hand, Wade Dillard was busy. He filed for emergency power of attorney over Nora's estate, claiming that Brielle was, and these were his exact words on the petition, too young and too emotionally unstable to manage the affairs of the incapacitated party. He submitted the filing to a county judge named Alderton, a man Wade happened to know from a land deal 3 years prior. A man who owed Wade a favor and apparently saw no reason not to repay it now. The paperwork went through in 72 hours. 72 hours. Nora's first prescription hadn't even been filled yet, and Wade Dillard already had legal control over her home, her land, her bank account, and every decision about her care. When Brielle found out, it wasn't because anyone told her. It was because she came back from the hospital cafeteria and found Wade sitting in the family waiting room with a folder of documents and a look on his face she'd never seen before. Comfortable, settled, like a man who had just finished arranging furniture in a house he'd already decided was his. He told her it was for Nora's protection. He told her these things needed to be handled by family. And then he looked at her. This girl who had lived under Nora's roof for 16 years, who had held Nora's hand through every fever and every storm and every lonely Christmas. And he said, "This is family business, sweetheart. You're not blood. You're just someone she took pity on." Brielle didn't cry. That's the part that mattered. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just went quiet, like someone had reached inside her chest and turned the volume all the way down. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped answering calls from the few friends who checked in. But she did not leave. She kept showing up at that hospital every single day. She sat in that chair. She held that hand. And she watched Wade come and go with his folders and his phone calls and his carnations that were already starting to wilt. Brielle did the only thing she knew how to do. She started digging, going through every paper, every file, every receipt Nora had ever kept. And what she found was worse than losing the farm. Now here's the thing about men like Wade. They count on silence. They count on good people just accepting it and walking away. If that makes your blood boil the way it makes mine, you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, Wade is not going to like how it ends. Brielle worked nights at a diner off the interstate and days at a hardware store in town. She slept in pieces, 2 hours here, 3 hours there. On a mattress she dragged into Nora's living room because she refused to sleep in Nora's bed. That felt like giving up. That felt like accepting that Nora wasn't coming back to sleep in it herself. And in between shifts, in the hours most people use for rest, Brielle went through every piece of paper Nora had ever saved. Receipts, tax returns, insurance documents, letters. Nora was the kind of woman who kept everything, filed in shoeboxes and labeled in her careful, slanted handwriting. It took Brielle 2 weeks to go through all of it. She didn't know what she was looking for. She just knew something was wrong. Wrong in a way that went deeper than a man with a folder and a judge who moved too fast. She found it under Nora's bed, a shoebox, older than the others, held shut with a rubber band that snapped the moment she touched it. Inside, she found 3 things that changed everything. The first was a will. Handwritten, dated 4 years earlier, signed by Nora and witnessed by 2 members of her church. It was simple and it was clear. Everything, the house, the land, all 40 acres, went to Brielle. Every last inch of it. The second was a pair of letters, both from Wade Dillard, both dated more than a year before the stroke. In each one, he offered to purchase the property at what he called a fair and generous price. Nora had written one word across the front of both letters in red ink. No. Capital letters, underlined twice. The third was a copy of a lien, a legal claim filed against the property for unpaid taxes. It carried the county seal and Wade Dillard's name. But here's what made Brielle's hands go still. The tax documents attached to the lien were forged. The amounts didn't match Nora's records. The dates didn't line up. And the filing had been made 6 months before Nora ever touched that kitchen floor. This wasn't a man who saw an opportunity and grabbed it. This was a man who built the trap, baited it, and waited. The stroke didn't start Wade's plan. It just moved up his timeline. Brielle took everything she had to the county sheriff. He looked through the papers. He nodded politely. He told her Wade's paperwork looked in order and suggested she get a lawyer if she had concerns. When she pointed to the forged tax documents, the numbers that didn't match, the dates that couldn't be right, the sheriff changed the subject. Asked her if she wanted a glass of water. Told her these things were more complicated than they seem. She left that office with every document she'd walked in with, and nothing else. What Brielle didn't know yet, what she wouldn't learn until it was almost too late, was that the sheriff and Wade had history. The kind of history that doesn't show up in any record. Brielle came home that evening to collect the shoebox. The will. The letters. The forged lien. She had a name. A lawyer 2 counties over that Nora's pastor had recommended. Someone outside the network. Someone Wade couldn't reach. She was going to drive there first thing in the morning. She never made it inside the house. There was a truck backed up to the front porch. 2 men she'd never seen before were carrying Nora's kitchen table down the steps. Her grandmother's kitchen table, the one Vernon built the same year he built the house. They were loading it into the bed of the truck like it was scrap. Wade was standing on the porch, arms folded, watching. Brielle walked straight to him, asked him what he was doing. He didn't flinch. He told her the property transfer had been finalized that morning. He told her she needed to leave. He said it calmly, the way a man tells a stranger that a store is closed. When Brielle turned toward the door, toward the bedroom, toward the shoebox, Wade grabbed her arm. What happened next took less than 2 minutes. Wade and his men dragged Brielle across the yard and into the barn. They looped a logging chain around her wrist, fed it through a support beam, and padlocked it shut. Wade picked up the shoebox. He looked at her and said, "By morning, this will all be settled. You can scream if you want. There's nobody out here to hear you." Then he walked out, and the barn went dark. Brielle spent 4 hours working the chain against the beam. Back and forth, back and forth. Her wrist bled. Her fingers went numb. She didn't stop. She didn't break the chain. She broke the beam. A rotted section gave way just after 2 in the morning. She pulled 6 feet of chain free, still padlocked to her wrist, and she started walking. She walked 11 miles in the dark, and she walked straight to the last place anyone would expect. She walked into a bar full of strangers, because strangers were the only people left. Dutch saw it first. He always did. 30 years behind that bar had trained his eyes the way a lighthouse keeper learns the sea, not by staring, but by noticing the moment something changes. And something changed the instant that door opened. The afternoon light spilled in across the floor like it had been shoved. A silhouette stood in the frame, small. Wrong. Everything about it was wrong for this place. Too narrow in the shoulders. Too still. And then came the sound. A low, grinding scrape. Metal dragging across wood planks that cut straight through the jukebox, straight through the low murmur of conversation, straight through the ordinary air of a Thursday afternoon, and replaced it with something Dutch hadn't felt in that bar in a very long time. The sound of something arriving that couldn't be ignored. He set the glass down. Didn't even realize he'd done it. That glass had been in his hand for the better part of 3 decades, and he set it down like he'd forgotten it existed. Hollis turned on his stool. He was on his 2nd coffee by then, reading glasses still tucked into his vest pocket, and he turned the way he always did, slow, deliberate, like a man who'd learned a long time ago that nothing in this world required him to rush. But when his eyes reached the doorway, he stopped moving entirely. A girl stood there, barely a woman. She couldn't have weighed 100 pounds. Her jeans were torn open at both knees, crusted with dried mud that ran all the way up to her thighs. Her shirt was ripped along one shoulder. Her hair was matted and tangled with pieces of hay and dirt, and something darker that might have been blood. Her wrists, Lord, her wrists, were raw, torn. The skin around both of them was shredded in a pattern that anyone with eyes could recognize. She'd been bound. She'd been held. And she'd fought her way free. And behind her, dragging from her right hand across the barroom floor, was a 6-foot logging chain. Heavy gauge steel. A padlock swinging from the end of it, catching the neon light with each slow arc, throwing tiny flashes of red and blue across the ceiling like something out of a fever dream. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has weight to it. 26 men and 1 woman stopped what they were doing at the exact same moment, and every single one of them turned toward that door. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. The song that had been playing faded into nothing, and the next track didn't start. Like the machine itself understood that this moment didn't belong to music. Brielle didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She didn't beg. She walked, swaying, barely steady, running on something deeper than adrenaline. to the center of that room, and she dropped the chain on the floor. It hit the wood with a sound like a judge's gavel. Final. Heavy. Absolute. She stood there, swaying, looking at no one and everyone at once. Hollis spoke first. His voice was low. Not soft, low. The voice of a man who already knows the answer is going to cost him something. He said, "Who did this to you?" Brielle looked at him, and with a voice scraped so thin you could almost see through it, she said, "The man who stole my grandmother's home. And the law helped him do it." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Pepper set down her pool cue. Didn't lean it against the table. Didn't rack it. She set it flat on the felt like she was putting something to rest. She crossed the room without a word, knelt down in front of Brielle, and took her wrists in both hands. Turned them over gently. Studied the wounds with the quiet precision of a woman who'd spent 15 years in emergency rooms. She looked up at Hollis. Didn't say a single word. Didn't have to. Her face said everything that needed saying. In the corner, Colt stood up so fast his chair hit the floor behind him. His face had gone white. His hands were trembling at his sides, and there was something in his eyes that had nothing to do with this girl and everything to do with a boy who once waited for someone to come and never saw them arrive. Hollis reached over without looking and put a hand on Colt's shoulder. Firm. Steady. Sit down, Colt. We're going to handle this. And in that moment, something shifted in that room. Something old. Something the Iron Vigil hadn't summoned in a long time. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter and far more dangerous. It was purpose. Dutch brought her water. Not a drink. Not a beer. A tall glass of water with ice in it. And he set it down in front of her the way you set something down in front of a person you're not sure can hold it. Brielle wrapped both hands around the glass and drank half of it without stopping. Pepper had cleaned her wrists by then, wrapped them in gauze from the med kit she kept in her saddlebag, the same kit she'd carried every day since she left the emergency room and never quite stopped being a nurse. She didn't ask Brielle if it hurt. She could see that it did. She just worked quickly and quietly and let her hands say what her mouth had the good sense not to. Then Brielle talked. And the room listened. She told them about Nora, about the stroke, about Wade showing up at the hospital with flowers and a folder. She told them about the power of attorney that moved faster than the medication. She told them about the shoebox under the bed, the will, the letters, the forged lien. She told them things they needed to hear. But she also told them things no one in that room expected. She said Wade had pulled her aside at the hospital 3 days after Nora was admitted and told her something she hadn't repeated to anyone until that moment. He said, "Your grandmother is never coming home from that facility. I'm going to make sure of it." It wasn't just about the land. Wade wanted Nora transferred to a state-run care home, a place where he, as power of attorney, would control every medical decision. What she ate, what treatments she received, whether anyone was allowed to visit. He wasn't just stealing a farm. He was building a cage around a 74-year-old woman who couldn't speak for herself. The room got heavier when she said that. You could feel it in the floorboards. Brielle told them she'd tried to get help. She called 3 lawyers. The first said he didn't handle property disputes. The second said he'd look into it, then never called back. The third was the one who broke it open. He told Brielle, almost apologetically, that Wade's cousin worked in the county clerk's office. The forged tax documents hadn't just been filed. They'd been certified, stamped, entered into the official record as legitimate. Getting them reversed would mean proving fraud inside the clerk's office itself, and no attorney in that county was going to touch that. Every door was locked. Every phone went to voicemail. Every system she turned to was either blind, bought, or afraid. Then Brielle said something that shifted the temperature of the entire room. She looked at Hollis and said, "I didn't come here by accident." She told them she'd seen the Iron Vigil riding through town. Saturdays, mostly. A column of chrome and thunder rolling down Main Street, while people stepped back onto the sidewalk and watched. She'd heard the way folks talked about them. Not with hatred, with respect. The kind of respect that lives next door to fear. And standing in that barn at 2 in the morning, bleeding, chained, with every legal option exhausted and every official door slammed shut, she made a decision. If the law won't help me, she said, maybe someone the law is afraid of will. That's the part people miss when they hear this story later. Brielle Harmon was not a helpless girl who stumbled into a biker bar by accident. She chose that bar. She chose those men. She dragged that chain 11 miles in the dark because she had already done the math, and this was the only answer left. The room was still. Hollis sat there for a long moment, looking at her the way a man looks at something he recognizes but hasn't seen in a long time. Then he asked her one question. Quiet, almost gentle. Is your grandmother still alive? Brielle nodded. Barely. Like the word yes was too heavy to say out loud. Hollis looked at Dutch. Dutch nodded once. Hollis looked at Pepper. She was already packing her med kit, hands moving with the muscle memory of a woman who understood that the next few hours were going to matter. Hollis stood up, pushed his stool back, looked around the room at every patch, every face, every man who had been sitting in that lazy Thursday afternoon pretending the world was standing still. And he said 2 words, church. Now, Wade Dillard locked a 20-year-old girl in a barn and stole a sick old woman's home. If you think that's unforgivable, drop a comment right now. Tell me, not on my watch. Because what these bikers are about to do, Wade never saw it coming. The back room of the Dusty Mule had a door that locked from the inside and walls thick enough to keep whatever was said in there from leaking out. A long wooden table, scarred and ring-stained, surrounded by mismatched chairs. No windows. One overhead light with a pull chain. This was where the Iron Vigil held church. Not the kind with hymns and prayers, but the kind where men who'd chosen each other as brothers sat down and decided what they were willing to do and how far they were willing to go. Brielle was not in that room. Pepper was with her at the bar, rewrapping the gauze on her wrists, making her eat a piece of bread she didn't want. The door was closed, and behind it, Hollis was talking. He laid it out clean. No drama, no embellishment. He repeated what Brielle had told them. The forged documents, the power of attorney, the chaining, the sheriff who looked the other way, and he did it with the flat precision of a man reading a supply list. Facts, dates, names. He wasn't selling anything. He was building a case. Then he stopped, and his voice changed. Not louder, lower, like a man stepping down into a room he hadn't entered in a long time. He told them about his daughter. Most of the men at that table had been with the club long enough to know pieces of it, but Hollis had never laid it out like this. She'd married a man who hit her. Hollis did everything the system told him to do. Restraining orders, court filings, lawyers who charged by the hour and delivered by the inch. None of it worked. His daughter's husband violated the restraining order twice and got a fine both times. Then one morning Hollis drove to her apartment and it was empty. She'd gone across state lines, changed her number, disappeared, not from her husband, but from everyone, including Hollis. He hadn't spoken to her in 14 years. I did it the right way, he said. Every step, every form, every courtroom. I did it the right way, and I lost her anyway. He looked around that table. Every man in that room was still. I'm not losing this one. The vote was unanimous, but it wasn't loud. Nobody slammed a fist on the table. Nobody shouted. One by one, each man said the word, I, the way a man says something he means to carry the weight of. Because every man at that table had a reason. A mother who lost a house. A brother who did time for a crime the system refused to see clearly. A past that taught them exactly what it looks like when the law decides you don't matter. This wasn't rage. This was recognition. Now here's where this story takes a turn that most people don't expect. Because when you hear that a motorcycle club voted unanimously to help a girl who walked in off the road dragging a chain, you picture engines roaring, dust flying, 26 angry men descending on a farmhouse to set things right with their fists. That's the version the movies sell you. That's not what happened. The Iron Vigil didn't ride out in rage. They went to work. Within 2 hours of that vote, the back room of the Dusty Mule looked less like a biker clubhouse and more like a war room. Hollis had divided the table into tasks, and every man at it had a job. A member named Griggs, retired long-haul trucker, 61 years old, built like a shipping container and about as talkative, had a contact at the county assessor's office. A woman he'd known since high school who owed him nothing but trusted him completely. He made one phone call. 20 minutes later, he had what he needed. The lien Wade had filed against the Harmon property wasn't just suspicious. It was built on tax records that didn't exist in the county's actual system. The numbers had been fabricated. The filing had been pushed through by the clerk's office without standard review. But that wasn't the worst of it. Griggs found a second filing. Same structure, same playbook, a different property belonging to a 70-year-old widow 3 towns over. Wade Dillard hadn't just targeted Nora. He had a pattern. This was a business. Pepper made her own call. She still had contacts at the hospital where Nora was being treated, nurses she'd worked alongside years ago, women who trusted her judgment. What she learned put a clock on everything. Wade had already filed the paperwork to have Nora transferred to a state-run care facility. Not a good one. The kind of place where patients go when no one is watching anymore. The transfer was scheduled for Monday morning. Today was Thursday. That gave them 3 days. 3 days before Nora Harmon disappeared into a system she might never come out of. Colt didn't wait to be asked. He grabbed his phone, got on his bike, and rode out to the Harmon property alone. He parked half a mile down the road, walked through the tree line, and spent 45 minutes documenting everything. Wade's men were still there, still loading furniture, still stripping the house like vultures pulling meat from bone. Colt recorded it all. The truck, the license plates, the faces. 2 men carrying out a dresser that had been in Nora's bedroom since 1974. He got every second of it on video, and he didn't make a sound. The foster kid who spent his whole life feeling invisible finally found a use for it. Back at the bar, a member named Finn sat at the table with a yellow legal pad and a pair of reading glasses that made him look more like an accountant than a man who'd once done 3 years in federal prison for wire fraud. Hollis had asked him to look at the forged lien. Not the property record, but the document itself. The format, the language, the signatures. Finn studied it for 15 minutes, then set his pen down and looked at Hollis with the expression of a man who'd just read his own handwriting in someone else's letter. "This is an amateur hour," he said. "Whoever made this had access to county letterhead, official seals, filing codes that aren't public. That means the clerk's office didn't just process this. They helped build it." And that's when the last piece fell into place. The piece Brielle never had access to. The piece that explained why the sheriff sat across from a 20-year-old girl with evidence of fraud in her hands and changed the subject. The sheriff's re-election campaign, the one he'd won 18 months earlier, was funded in part by a construction company called Ridgeline Partners. It was a small outfit, mostly residential development. And Wade Dillard was a silent partner. Not on the letterhead, not on the website, but on the books, quietly, where it mattered. The sheriff wasn't ignoring Brielle. He was protecting his investment. The whole thing was a closed loop. Wade, the clerk, the sheriff, the judge, every door Brielle could have knocked on was connected to the man who chained her in a barn. She wasn't just fighting one man. She was trapped inside a system designed to erase her. But Hollis wasn't planning to knock on any doors. He was planning to kick one down. And he was going to do it in broad daylight, with witnesses, and in a way that Wade couldn't deny, couldn't hide from, and couldn't lawyer his way out of. Hollis stood at the head of that table and did something that surprised every man in the room. He told them what they were not going to do. They were not going to ride out to the Harmon property. They were not going to put their hands on Wade Dillard or either of his men. They were not going to threaten, intimidate, corner, or confront anyone in any way that could be written up in a police report. He said it once, and he said it clearly, and every man in that room understood that this was not a suggestion. Then he told them what they were going to do, and it was better. Step 1. A journalist. Not a local paper. Not anyone who shared a barber shop or a church pew with the county clerk. Pepper knew a reporter at a television station 2 counties over. A woman who'd been covering rural corruption stories for 6 years and had the kind of reputation that made small-town officials lose their appetite. Pepper would make the call, get her interested, get her cameras pointed at the right piece of ground at the right time. Step 2. A court filing. Not in Wade's county. That courthouse was compromised from the judge's bench to the filing cabinet. Hollis wanted an emergency petition filed with a circuit court judge in the next district over. Someone Wade had never met. Someone who owed nothing to anyone in that closed loop of favors and forged paper. They had Colt's video. They had Griggs's property records. They had Finn's analysis of the forged lien. They had Brielle's injuries, photographed and documented by a former ER nurse. It was enough. It had to be enough. Step 3. Show up. All of them. Not at the farmhouse. On the public road that bordered the property line. Every member. Every bike. Standing in a row on public land where they had every legal right to be, with a television crew behind them and a camera pointed at the front porch of a house that didn't belong to the man standing on it. Let Wade Dillard walk outside and explain, on camera, to a reporter, with 26 witnesses in iron vigil patches standing 50 yards away, why he chained a 20-year-old girl in a barn. Step 4. A lawyer. A real one. Not from the county. Not from anywhere Wade's money or connections could reach. Pepper's ex-husband was an attorney in Nashville. Corporate law, mostly, but licensed in the state and smart enough to know who to call for everything else. She hadn't spoken to him in 6 years. The marriage ended the way a lot of marriages end when one person rides with an MC and the other bills $400 an hour. But Pepper picked up the phone and dialed the number from memory, because some things matter more than pride. Hollis looked around that table one more time. "We're not breaking any laws," he said. "We're going to stand on a public road and let the truth do the breaking." That was the moment the Iron Vigil became something more than a motorcycle club. Not soldiers, not vigilantes, witnesses. The most dangerous thing a corrupt system can face. A room full of people who refused to look away. The plan was set. The pieces were moving. Every man in that room felt it. That rare, electric certainty that comes when the right thing and the hard thing turn out to be the same thing. There was just one problem. Wade Dillard was already 2 steps ahead. And the phone call he made that night would change everything. Small towns have a heartbeat. And that heartbeat is gossip. It doesn't matter how quiet you are, how careful you plan, or how tightly you close a door. Word moves through a small town the way water moves through limestone. Slowly, silently, and into every crack. Wade Dillard found out about the bikers before the sun came up on Friday morning. Nobody knows exactly who told him. Could have been the bartender at another joint who overheard 2 prospects talking. Could have been someone at the gas station who noticed too many Iron Vigil bikes still parked at the Dusty Mule long after closing. Doesn't matter. What matters is that Wade picked up his phone, called the county sheriff, and told him that a motorcycle gang, that's the word he used, gang, was threatening him and planning to raid his property. The sheriff didn't ask questions, didn't ask for evidence, didn't do any of the things a lawman is supposed to do when someone files a complaint. He simply drew up an emergency protective order restricting any person associated with the Iron Vigil Motorcycle Club from coming within 500 yards of the Harmon property. Signed it himself. Filed it that night. And by Friday morning, it was done. Hollis got the call just after 7. Pepper's ex-husband, the Nashville attorney, delivered the news the way lawyers deliver news. Calm, precise, devastating. There's a restraining order. Every member, every associate, every prospect. If any of you show up within 500 yards of that property, you're going to jail. All of you. The air in the back room of the Dusty Mule turned to concrete. Colt put his fist through the drywall beside the bathroom door. 2 senior members said they'd risk it. Said they'd take the arrest, take the charges, take whatever came. Hollis shut it down with one sentence. He wants us to break the law. That's the only play he has left. We are not giving it to him. Silence. The kind that tastes like defeat. And then a voice came from the doorway. Quiet. Steady. Scraped raw but unbroken. The order is against you. Not against me. Brielle was standing in the frame. She'd been sleeping in the back room for 2 nights, on a cot Pepper had set up beside the mop sink. She looked like she'd barely slept. But her eyes were clear. Clearer than they'd been since she walked through that door dragging 6 feet of chain. "He can't keep me off my grandmother's land," she said. "I have a legal will naming me his heir. And I have this." She held up the chain. The padlock caught the light. "This is evidence of a crime. Assault. False imprisonment. I'm going to walk onto that property, and I'm going to call the state police. Not the county sheriff. The state." The room didn't move. Hollis looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, so slowly you might have missed it if you blinked, something crossed his face that might have been a smile. Not the kind that comes from amusement. The kind that comes from recognition. "You don't need us to stand with you on that land," he said. "You just need us to make sure the cameras are rolling when you do." This girl walked 11 miles in the dark with a chain on her wrist. Wade thought he could break her. He thought wrong. If you're the kind of person who doesn't back down from a bully, hit that like button right now. Make it count. Because every like tells the algorithm to put this story in front of more people. And stories like this, they need to be heard. Saturday morning came in quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you. The kind that warns you. Mist hung low over the Tennessee hills like the land itself was holding something back. The fields were still. The cattle in the distance stood motionless, dark shapes against a sky that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to be gray or gold. And the Harmon farmhouse sat at the top of the hill the way it had sat for 50 years, solid, patient, waiting, like it knew something was coming before anyone else did. Brielle was awake before dawn. She'd barely slept. Pepper had given her clean clothes, a plain white shirt, jeans that were a size too big, a belt cinched tight to hold them up. Brielle had washed the mud out of her hair and the dried blood from her arms, but she hadn't covered the bruises on her wrists. She'd looked at them in the bathroom mirror of the Dusty Mule, turning her hands over slowly under the fluorescent light, and she'd made a decision. She left them visible. She wanted the cameras to see what Wade Dillard had done. She wanted the whole world to see it. At 6:15, the first engine turned over in the parking lot. Then another. Then another. One by one, like a roll call spoken in thunder, 31 motorcycles rumbled to life in the gray morning air. Not 26. 31. Word had spread overnight. 5 members from a neighboring chapter had ridden in before sunrise. Nobody asked them to. Nobody had to. The convoy pulled out of the Dusty Mule's gravel lot in a single column. Hollis at the front, Pepper behind him, Colt near the back, riding tighter to the line than he ever had before, like the formation itself was holding him steady. They rolled down Route 41 with their headlights cutting through the mist, and the sound of those engines carried across the hills the way thunder carries before a storm, low and long and impossible to ignore. They did not turn onto the Harmon property. They parked along the public road that bordered it. One by one, each rider backed into position along the gravel shoulder until 31 motorcycles sat in a perfect line, chrome catching the first pale light of morning. Engines off. Helmets off. Every man and woman standing beside their bike with their hands at their sides. Legal. Visible. Unmissable. Not one of them crossed the property line. Not one of them needed to. Their presence alone was a sentence that didn't require punctuation. The television crew was already there. The reporter Pepper had called, a woman who'd spent 6 years pulling the covers off small-town corruption and had the kind of face that made guilty men stammer, stood beside her camera operator at the edge of the road. The red light on the camera was already glowing. They were filming everything. And then Brielle walked. She stepped off the public road and onto the Harmon property alone. No one walked with her. No one held her hand. She carried the chain in her right fist, 6 feet of it looped over her forearm, the padlock swinging at her side with each step. She walked up the gravel driveway her grandmother had walked 10,000 times before. Past the oak tree with her mother's name carved into the bark. Past the spot where the porch swing used to hang before Wade's men had taken it down. She walked with her shoulders back and her bruised wrists uncovered and her eyes fixed on the front door of the house that belonged to her. Wade Dillard came out onto the porch holding a coffee cup. He was wearing a clean shirt, pressed slacks, like a man who'd already won and was simply enjoying the view from the top of someone else's hill. He saw Brielle first, and his expression flickered. Annoyance, mostly, the kind a man shows when a problem he thought he'd solved reappears at an inconvenient hour. Then his eyes moved past her, down the driveway, to the road. He saw the bikes, 31 of them. A wall of chrome and leather and silence stretched along the shoulder of the road, every rider standing motionless, every face turned toward the farmhouse. He saw the television camera. He saw the reporter. He saw the red light blinking, and his face changed. Not all at once. It happened in layers, the way confidence leaves a man who suddenly realizes he's been standing on a trapdoor. The smile didn't fall. It just stopped meaning anything. Brielle stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She spoke clearly, evenly, and loud enough for the microphone clipped to the reporter's outstretched hand to catch every word. She said what Wade had done. She named the forged lien. She named the fraudulent power of attorney. She described being dragged into the barn, the chain, the padlock, the 4 hours in the dark. She named the county clerk who certified the documents. She named the sheriff who turned her away. She held up the chain and let it hang in the morning air, the padlock turning slowly, catching the light. Wade called it a family misunderstanding. He said Brielle was mentally unstable. He said the girl had a history of erratic behavior and that he was simply trying to protect his aunt's estate. He reached into his pocket for his phone. He was going to call the sheriff. He never finished dialing. 2 state police cruisers came up the road from the east. No sirens. No lights. Just the slow, deliberate roll of vehicles that have already been given their orders. Brielle had called them before she ever stepped off that public road. And the Nashville attorney. The man Pepper hadn't spoken to in 6 years, the man who answered her call anyway, had filed the emergency petition with a circuit court judge on Friday night. A judge outside Wade's county. Outside his network. Outside his reach. That judge had issued a temporary freeze on all property transfers connected to the Harmon estate and signed a warrant for Wade Dillard's arrest on charges of assault, false imprisonment, and fraud. Wade saw the cruisers, and his shoulders dropped. Not all at once. Slowly, like air leaving a tire. The coffee cup began to shake in his hand, and he didn't seem to notice. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He didn't say another word. He just stood there on a porch that wasn't his and watched two state troopers walk up the driveway toward him, and whatever he'd been pretending to be for the last year drained out of him right there on camera for the whole world to see. As the troopers walked Wade toward the cruiser, Brielle climbed the porch steps. She set the chain down on the wooden planks. Right there, right where Nora used to sit in the evenings and watch the sun go down behind the hills. Brielle didn't say anything. She just set it down, straightened up, and stood on her grandmother's porch with her hands at her sides. Hollis, standing beside his bike on the public road 50 yards away, watched her. He nodded once. That was all. That was enough. Wade Dillard was charged with assault, false imprisonment, and 3 counts of fraud. When the second widow's case surfaced, the investigation widened. 2 county officials, including the clerk, were placed on administrative leave. The sheriff was never formally charged, but he quietly chose not to run for re-election. The Nashville attorney made sure of that. Nora's property transfer was voided. The circuit court recognized the handwritten will. Brielle was appointed legal guardian. And 3 weeks later, Nora came home. Brielle wheeled her up a ramp that Colt and 2 club members had built over a single weekend. Nora's hand found the porch railing and stayed there. The stroke had taken some of her words. But she squeezed Brielle's hand hard enough to say everything that mattered. Pepper came by twice a week after that. Checked on Nora. Taught Brielle physical therapy exercises. They didn't talk about what happened much. They didn't need to. Colt drove out every Saturday. Fixed fences. Replaced rotted boards. Brielle brought him sweet tea and left it on the post without a word. One afternoon she found him sitting on the tailgate of his truck, staring at the oak tree, the one with the name carved into it. She sat beside him. Neither of them spoke, but neither of them was alone. Brielle kept the chain. She didn't bury it. Didn't throw it in the creek behind the property. Didn't ask anyone to haul it to the scrapyard. She took it into the barn. The same barn where Wade's men had dragged her. The same barn where she'd spent 4 hours in the dark grinding steel against wood until something finally gave, and she hung it from a nail on the wall. Right there in the open, where anyone who walked in could see it. People asked her why. Pepper asked once, gently, while checking Nora's blood pressure on the porch. Colt never asked, but she caught him staring at it one Saturday afternoon, standing in the barn doorway with a fence post over his shoulder, looking at the chain like it was a language he almost understood. She didn't explain it to either of them. She wasn't sure she could. Not yet. But Hollis understood. He came by one afternoon, months later. Alone. No club. No convoy. Just one motorcycle pulling up the gravel drive, and one man walking across the yard with his hands in his pockets and his reading glasses catching the autumn light. He didn't go to the house. He walked to the barn. Stood in the doorway the way a man stands at the entrance of a place he recognizes but has never been. He looked at the chain hanging on the wall for a long time. You kept it, he said. Brielle was standing behind him. She'd seen him pull up from the kitchen window. She looked at the chain. It's not about remembering what he did, she said. It's about remembering what I did. I dragged it 11 miles. I dragged it into a room full of strangers and asked for help. That was the hardest thing I ever did. Harder than breaking the beam. Harder than walking onto this property with cameras rolling. Asking for help. Hollis nodded. A long silence passed between them. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled because it's already full. That's not weakness, he said. That's the bravest thing there is. Kindness doesn't always wear a soft face. Sometimes it wears leather and engine grease. Sometimes it shows up on 31 motorcycles at dawn. And sometimes the most powerful act of kindness is simply standing there, being seen, being counted, and refusing to look away. Brielle Harmon kept the chain, and she kept the lesson it taught her. That the heaviest thing you'll ever carry isn't the thing that holds you down. It's the weight of believing you have to carry it alone. If this story hit you the way it hit me, if you believe that the measure of who we are isn't power or money, but whether we stand up when someone needs us, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me. For every story like this one that deserves to be told. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. And I'll ask you one thing. Drop a comment. Tell me, has a stranger ever shown up for you when nobody else would? I want to hear your story. Because I have a feeling this community is full of people like Hollis, like Pepper, like Colt. People who don't look away. Wade Dillard counted on silence. Let's make sure people like him never get it. Next video is right here. I'll see you there.